G'day there, South Australia and wherever else you might be tuning in from. I'm joined again by Michael Arbon, who caught up with late last year with a bit of a yarn, and it's lots happened in between then. There's Christmas and New Year and everything else that's going on. It seems like one year's just rolled into the other. So welcome and welcome back, Michael.
Thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here again, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, and to you. And there's definitely already, what are we, 15 days into the new year, and there's not a shortage of things to unpack and discuss, and things that have challenged us. So, have you been well?
I've been good, thanks, Mark. Spent a couple of weeks over at Coffin Bay catching whiting and swimming and catching salmon off the beach and living a good life. So back to the grind the last couple of weeks, but really enjoyed getting some sun. It was nice.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Get the family over and have a bit of time R&R and a good time. We celebrated. My brother was down from interstate and family, and we had my mum's 80th, so we all celebrated that, which was nice. And obviously the Christmas and New Year, and as you know, the 6-odd week school holidays is always a bit interesting, trying to fill the time in with the kids. But you know, you get there, you do what you can, and away you go.
That's right. And then fast forward a few years and we'll long for those days when we have the kids home for 6 weeks. So you've got to make the most of it.
Well, you know that I've got adult kids and we've just gone back to younger ones. So, you know, I've got a little while to go. So I reckon by the time our youngest is 18, I'll be 65. So I'm not sure if we'll take on any more, but anyway, it keeps us young. The old saying is it keeps us young. But we're going to chat a few things because it's kind of in your realm. You know, you're in that financial space, you know, economics and finance and all that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit that you know a little bit about it. And we obviously follow each other on different platforms, and I see that you commenting on a few things, and thought it'd be good just to have a chat about some of those things and others. But before we get into that, like you're also part of obviously the FOTH team here in South Australia, so very South Australia centric. So this is a group that was designed to support other groups to kind of push back on a lot of things that are happening. How's things going there with FOTH? Everything you know, still ticking along into the new year? Any updates there?
Yeah, we finished the year on a high last year with FOTH. We had a National Free Media Summit again in Adelaide. That was in the first week of December. We had a number of 100 people in the Nord Town Hall, and we had some amazing speakers. And probably one of the highlights was actually we had this sort of community market section at the Free Media Summit, and there were dozens of small businesses, volunteer groups and charities and all sorts of groups there just collaborating with everyone. So there was, you know, 300-400 people in that space, just mixing and volunteering and buying goods and really just finding like-minded people and causes that they can contribute to. Because I think, Mark, I keep saying it, but I think the reason why FOTH needs to exist is to connect people who want to do something with other groups that are already doing it and to help them to do it better. It's as simple as that. So the Free Media Summit is a good opportunity for that. And we had speakers like Katie Ashby-Coppins and Rebecca Barnett and Kurt Malberg and John Larder and Graham Hood. So we had some really high quality speakers cover some really good topics. And you know, especially Rebecca, Katie and Kurt, they're real academics and sort of they can show how they're really professionalizing what they do. And they're a bit of an example for us to sort of raise that bar and move on to really productive tasks and putting good content out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a privilege of attending that event, and I loved all the speakers, and they're just amazing in their own right. But you're right with that little media market, that little market you had. I really loved that because I bumped into and met some amazing people. You know, there was the NERA representative. Obviously, that's a big thing as part of the Alliance Council of Australia, and obviously also the Live for Life. You know, people were there, so we've got that event coming up, the Walk for Life, as well here in South Australia, which is a great thing. And I think it was Michael from Flow. Is it Flow FM? I think was there, doing some great work in his own.
Wayne from Flow
Wayne,
FM.
sorry, yeah,
amazing
Wayne. That's
radio
right.
station, regional South Australia, and do a lot of good work. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a real pleasure talking to him, just seeing that, that especially both you and I are both people of the Christian faith, and he's definitely, allowed that to kind of shine through on that platform as well, which is really great, and getting out to all those regional areas, which is really, really good. So no, definitely, it was a great event, and there's great things to come, I believe, and I believe that Flag on the Hill, FOTH, is involved is one of the groups part of the Alliance Council of Australia as well, and providing obviously feedback and then filtering out to all the other organisations throughout our country. And it's just amazing to see the Alliance Council of Australia growing the way it has and getting the platform that it is, and really looking to see some great stuff coming out of that over the next 12 months. That's great.
I agree, and the ACA's doing everything that they do without a big amount of money. It's people power. There's a lot of people that are professional and know what they're doing that are giving up their time for the greater good and to sort of bring us all together. If only we could see the sort of unity that the ACA's showing in politics, we would be able to achieve a lot more in the political space as well, Mark.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. We've got a way to go, and that's a bigger thing to talk about in regards to changing the guard, which I often talk to, Bruce and others about whenever I get a chance. Is Liberal and Labor doesn't seem to be the fit for Australians moving forward. If we want a country that's, self-sustainable, away from the globalist influences and so many other things that are impacting our nation, and the DEI, the woke ideologies, and all that sort of stuff. So really, we need to switch it up a little bit in regards to our representatives as well. And you're in that space. You're obviously part of the UAP with Ralph Babet, and so you're in the thick of it and know what's going on in there. So we're seeing some good things, and it's really just about agitating that a bit further. Yeah,
absolutely. Just consistency pays eventually. You've just got to stay in the game, don't you?
100%. Well, how about we crack into, so one of the things I wanted to share here is just bring this up for both of us, is this article here in the Sydney Morning Herald. So surprising amount you could afford to spend on a house. So, that's saying that the average household could afford to buy a home worth up to only $513,000, leaving the vast majority of properties out of reach, because ultimately that's not what houses are valued. It says that compares with the national medium dwelling value house and units combined of $815,000. So, yeah, what do you reckon about that? A little bit to talk into that as well.
What surprises me every day, Mark, is that we're still seeing houses sell for $8-9 million every single day, and house prices are not falling like a logical person believes they probably should. When you look at what someone can afford to borrow, what sort of the savings rates are, and the cost of living. So obviously our housing market is simply just a supply and demand calculation, and at the moment we have excessive demand and a real lack of supply. And the problem I see with this all the time is the solution is always less government. It's not more government intervention, but unfortunately governments like to be popular and they like to play the short-term game. So whenever they say an issue with housing affordability or getting out of step with reality, they usually step in with more demand side stimulus. Grants for purchases of land, or construction grants, or even the first home loan deposit scheme that's out there at the moment, which guarantees the loans above 80% up to 95%. So it protects the banks for a loss on those loans and saves the applicant's lender's mortgage insurance. But unfortunately, what that does is it means, once again, that people can still pay more than they probably should for a house. They can borrow more than they probably should. And it increases the demand, not the supply. What governments should be doing, if they're in their right mind, is removing the barriers to construction of new homes. So excessive taxes, excessive regulations, those sorts of things. I was reading the other day, I think the Property Council of Australia did an analysis on brand new homes in Queensland, and you probably won't believe this, or maybe you will because you're quite schooled up on this stuff, but 1/3 of the cost of a brand new house and land package in Queensland is made up of taxes, fees and charges. Houses should be 1/3 cheaper if government just got the heck out of the way. but unfortunately they've got their nose in it at every single stage. So, you know, you take a third of the value off of a house and they're probably about where they should be. You know, I won't be too popular for saying this, but I think house prices are way too high and they need to come down. They're not sustainable. Australia's amongst the least affordable in the entire world. And the reason largely is because of inflationary impact of the large amount of money pumped into the economy during 2020 to 2023 by the government and the RBA. They printed and they borrowed like it was going out of fashion. And that excess amount of money circulating in the economy has led to an increase in house prices. But you've also got the open borders migration policy, which has increased the number of people that need a bed. And all of a sudden you've got another, say, million people in Australia that need somewhere to live. So of course there's excess demand, and there's no way we're going to build the houses that Mr. Chalmers says we're going to either. We're way behind his target of 500,000 houses in 3 years. So it's a bit of a perfect storm, but all I need to keep repeating is less government is the answer. Let the market do what markets do. They go up and they go down, and give up with this concept of forever growth. It's not sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. And those you know, those rebates, first home buyer grants, but are one thing. But then, like you say, the bureaucracy is one of the big things. When I was having a look at some of this stuff, it's been able to release. Well, for starters, its council's been able to release land, but then all the restrictions they put on builders and developers to be able to get into that, and the red tape. And like you say, a third of the cost of that goes to all that, which is a huge amount of money. And you know, obviously we've got, you know, Arbon now saying that he's, you know, 600 new homes when he couldn't even, you know, can't even meet the targets that he set at the last promise that he made at the election. You know, so it's really a tricky thing that they're saying. They're making all these promises, obviously, for the election coming up. Obviously, we've got within the next few months, and they make these grandiose promises that they never deliver on. So this is one of the things that you kind of wonder when Australians will wake up and go, well, these people never, you know, commit to their promises. So what do we do?
That's right. And then, you know, you've got the cost of electricity, and manufacturing barely exists in Australia anymore. So we're importing a lot of the components, and, you know, the list of causes for the high house prices are pretty endless. But probably one of the big causes is also the environmental policies. So net zero flows through the construction of a house. We're looking at, you know, building gold-plated 5-star houses. When I was driving through the US a couple of months ago, and they have all varying types of houses, but in many parts of America, you can easily buy a block of land and park a trailer on it and live there. And at least you've got a roof over your head. It's affordable, it's stable, and you have somewhere to live. But here in Australia, if you compare the housing market to, say, the car market, if you want to go out and buy a car, you can buy a Kia or you can buy a Mercedes. They're different price ranges. You can buy an expensive car or a cheap car, but it appears in housing that you can't really get anything approved through council unless it's a Mercedes. You've got to have all the bells and whistles to tick the boxes. There's a real niche there that needs to be tapped, which is the cheap, simple housing that doesn't have all the bells and whistles, because it does serve a purpose. And the number one thing that creates stability and a chance of, you know, some form of succession in life is a stable roof over your head. That's what people need. And if it's a cheaper, poorer house, so what? It's still a house. It's somewhere to live.
Yeah, well, that's part of the you know, United Nations Human Rights Charter, isn't it? As someone that, you know, has a safe dwelling and access to all that. And, you know, this kind of surprises me a bit, where you see that I've heard stories of people being arrested or, you know, moved on or fined for sleeping in their cars or vans or whatever, and on the side of the road when they're homeless. So we've got a, you know, a group of people in Australia that can't, that are, you know, couch surfing or can't even afford to live in a house, and they're living in a car or on the streets, where I know that there's property owners with acres that would be more than happy to, you know, have someone camp up in a caravan, or even, you know, they'd probably even invest in building a small home on their property. But again, this is the government bureaucracy here in Australia that we're saying, well, no, we're going to put in too many regulations and stipulations to get this person off the street. You have to do this, and this, and it becomes way too hard to be able to help someone, a family that's struggling. You know, I've heard of families with kids actually, you know, living in cars, and yet the bureaucracy says, well, no, you can't give up your land, or you can't do this, even if it's acreage, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And I think rules have loosened a little bit on granny flats. I think, the regulators have got a little bit better on allowing you to build a granny flat and have someone live in there. I think that makes a lot of common sense. And I think it's actually really good for families if your teenage child can have that little bit of independence and live out the back, or even an elderly family member. It's called a granny flat for a reason, and it's sort of it benefits both. It goes both ways. That the family can assist with raising your kids and looking after them, and you can provide a stable roof over their head. It's kind of how it should be, and how they do it in Japan in older age is they look after their own family. They help them all the way through, and they don't have to throw them into an aged care home too early.
Yeah, well, and that's it, isn't it? This is some cultures do that really, really well, where the family members don't actually have to look at aged care facilities, and they kind of they board them up and support them. And I guess even if there was a small contribution from the I guess we can't say government because it's taxpayers, other people's money. It's always ours, and we always got to look at ways that we can, that it can be spent more efficiently. And there's much bigger arguments from people about this. We got the libertarian view about cutting all of that, and everybody lives sort of not using other people's money. But to a certain extent, and I guess as Christians as well, we acknowledge that some people need that support, throughout their life. And if you're in a country where by all respects and purposes, many people are fairly wealthy still, we should be able to be in a position where we support others. But we can do more so if the majority of Australians aren't living under housing or financial crisis. We can give back and do those things much more effectively. So it's really it's a two-edged sword, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Correct. And you got biblical tithing of 10% of your income. That's designed to support your community, support the widow, not to build a big fancy church. It's about actually helping those that need it. And I'd much prefer to give my money direct than have it go through the government, be chewed up by a bureaucracy, to be perfectly honest. But and we're also seeing policies come out this election. I think Jared Rennick released one the other day about in terms of childcare money, if you're going to give it to a family who chooses for both parents to work or whatever, or and it goes to the childcare company, why can't a payment go to the grandparent who looks after that child for a lot less money than it's going to cost to go to the childcare facility? It's like, let's think about this. What's the better value for the taxpayer, but also for that child? Is it better for them to have a stronger relationship with family, or to be raised by a stranger? It's a no-brainer for me as well. It's much like providing vouchers for schools instead of schools applying for all sorts of crazy grants and stuff. Every child should be worth a dollar value. The parent gets that voucher for $15,000. They spend it where they like, private or public. They choose the school, and the school gets that amount of money. The better schools get the most money, and the worst schools have to lift their game. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is what happens, isn't it, in society in general? Because word gets around if someone, if a school's really, really doing well and the child's thriving, both academically and emotionally and all that, then you're going to continue to grow that school. And and a bit of a throw off from that is we've seen the public school system, as a lot of people are pulling their children out of that because they really don't believe in the values of the stuff that's being taught in schools. We're talking massive ideologies, which is a totally different subject to what we're talking about today. But that gives the parents the choice to say, well, I don't want to send my child to that public school. I actually want to do something else. Rather than giving the school the money, you're actually giving it to the parents to decide what they want to do. And again, just before people ask, this is purely designed. It's not so some people check a 15K and they've got to can spend it. This is purely designed for the education of your child. So it's not saying that we want to just give people money and off you go. So it's a great initiative, and Gerard's got a lot of those kind of initiatives as well. So which is really great in some of these policies.
No, it's good to see a few new ideas come out, even if people criticise them. I'd much prefer. Same thing happens with the UAP and One Nation and many other parties. It's good to see new ideas, and even if they're trashed, at least it gets a conversation going, and people start to think about, why is the system the way it is? And is that the best way forward? And likely not. But you've got to have that early chat first and sort of disrupt them in order to get change long term. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I guess, Liberal and Labor get the sound bites because the media supports a lot of them, and the media avoids smaller up and coming parties and independents because, we've seen that they seem to be just another arm rather than being the fourth estate. They're just another arm of the government, unfortunately, and COVID has definitely shown that as well. Now, you did pick up on, you did pip Liberal in one of your posts, and I'll bring that up now, is old mate.
Yeah, I get stuck into Jim Chalmers quite a bit, but every now and then I like to give a bit back to Mr. Dutton as well. So
yeah, good on you. And so
I
we
guess
should.
this is just another example of a policy that has no real meat. Personally, I oppose compulsory super in general. So, the point of this post wasn't to oppose, touching super, because you know what? I don't trust government long-term not to touch our super heavily. So that's the reason why I think people should have a choice around whether their money goes compulsorily into super or not. It works for some, it's a forced savings plan. But for others, maybe they could do better if their money wasn't forced to go into there. Maybe they'd prefer to clear their home loan 12 or 13 years sooner by throwing the money into there. There's other options, right? But Dutton's released here that he's going to support first home buyers and older women to overcome the prohibitive challenge of saving for a home deposit by allowing super savings to be used to help build their deposit. So first thing I think here is, well, you can take an extra 50 grand out of your super. What's that going to do? You're probably going to pay 50 grand more for a house. So it's more demand side stimulus. Second thing I think is, well, here they are touching super again when we were told it was something that government would never touch. Chalmers stepped in last year and started taxing higher balances. Now the Liberals are stepping in and allowing you to pull money out to throw in for a house deposit. What I would say to Dutton is that if you're going to come out with a strategy around touching super, go big. Start to talk differently and maybe start to question the nature of compulsory super, because we know that the majority of people are still reliant on the age pension when they retire. They're not retiring and relying solely on their superannuation balance. That hasn't worked. And there's a lot of businesses out there and a lot of people who are good with their money that may prefer to throw it somewhere else. And you're just looking at another post there now, Mark, where I ran the numbers on what if super wasn't voluntary and you chose to throw all of those payments on your mortgage instead of having it going into super, and your 30-year home loan all of a sudden becomes a 16 years and 9 months home loan. So you're debt-free 13 years earlier. And you've saved just under $400,000 in interest. That's just on the median home loan. So, it just makes people think, well, what is my super balance after that 13 years? And would I be better off being debt-free in my 40s? Or would I be better off hoping that one day when I reach my mid-70s, probably for the younger generation now, I might one day be able to spend some of that money in retirement that's sitting in super, or maybe I'll just die and my kids will inherit it. So I think those hard conversations need to be had around super, because we were promised a lot, but I'm not sure it's working out just as they expected.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I've for the last 6 years, I've been 6 years ago, I put together a little video about, because there was so many regulations around super that you couldn't really, go do much, this voluntary stuff. But talked about the self-managed super, which was set up, and then investing and stuff, which in itself, talks a little bit into what you were talking about before, because the more people that use their super that then use it to invest, it kind of does artificially push up the prices of houses because more people are doing it. But I mean, ultimately, who's going to step in? There was lots of people talking about taking away the benefits of being able to have an investment property, and I looked at it and went, well, okay, what would happen if people did that? Well, it would actually cause a massive issue even further on top of our housing crisis, because a lot of investors are actually propping up the building of houses, and if you take them out of the picture altogether, it actually, for a number of years, would make the situation a lot worse, especially seeing they're continuing with the migration numbers. But the way I looked at it with the super is I chucked around the idea of an owner-occupied self-managed super fund, which will still be regulated. So we now, you were talking about a non-compulsory super at all, and people can choose to do what they want, so not paying into super, and they can do it. But the other side of that, I thought, which kind of talks into the numbers that you were running, because I did the same numbers over 6 years ago as an owner-occupied self-managed super. If both your incomes, both your super, say you had your spouse, went into that paying down your mortgage, you could still have the super account, the self-managed super, sitting alongside the loan through the bank, as you do with a self-managed super account. And you would, I did the same sort of figures. It was saving something like 13, 16, 19 years off your own mortgage. And the only thing I said to that is, okay, you still can't sell your house and put that money in the pocket. There's a preserved amount, but when you're 65, it's done. You know, you can do whatever you want with it or at retirement. But during the process, you can, if you wanted to upsize or do whatever, you could still sell that house. But let's say your super has got 400,000 against that house. You would roll that over into the new house. You still couldn't touch it and do with it what you want. It'd still be preserved, but you'd be able to upsize and still not have a bigger mortgage. And that's the kind of concept I was thinking of before. You know, obviously Gerard Rennick and yourself and that are talking about, obviously, you know, scrapping compulsory super altogether. But I always thought that as, you know, I'd love that opportunity. I mean, that would set a lot of people up a lot earlier, owning their own home, and then they could choose to do what they want with their money. You know, whether they want to invest in community initiatives. That's, you know, where people pool their super together and they say, let's build a swimming pool, whatever, and we you know, each other, whatever, you know, and people could do that, sort of that community-based funding kind of thing. But they're just some of the things I was toying around with.
That's a great concept, and that's kind of how politics works. Is the first idea expands the Overton window, then you look at what we already have, and what you've provided there is an option which preserves the concept of super. You can't touch your money. It delivers a guaranteed return and an increase in quality of life for the individual until they can touch their money. So it kind of ticks both boxes, and that's a kind of concept that would maybe appease those on the other side of politics a bit more as well. It's that middle ground which provides the outcome we want, people owning their own home and not retiring with a mortgage, because it's a terrible thing to retire with a debt. I hate seeing people retire with debt, because most people in their retirement can't afford to pay interest on debts. They need to be debt free, and what you're providing is a vehicle for that, and they can achieve it sooner than if they had to wait to access their super at an older age. And I think the other point on super, while we're on it, is that what probably people don't really understand is super is a massive amount of money. It's a few $1 trillion, and the unions control a bunch of that money, right? And even though the unions it may not be their money, they're holding on behalf of someone else, the fact that they have control over where that money goes gives them enormous influence over government, because some of those funds get invested in things like public infrastructure projects, right? So if Treasurer Chalmers wants to, you know, announce a big spend of hundreds of billions of dollars on an infrastructure project, he's not going to fund the whole lot. He might do it in partnership with a super fund who will provide some capital, but he'll get the credit for that. And the super fund knows that. So that gives them an awful amount of negotiating power and power over changes to legislation around super. And other little known facts are the fact that superannuation funds use your money to donate to political parties. And that's insane. As if they should, their sole objective is to give you the greatest return humanly possible. But what they're doing is they're picking winners politically and they're backing them, which is insane. And we've also seen super funds come out with their own policies around, you know, DEI and climate and other bits and pieces. And I don't give a stuff about that with my money. Your job is to give me the greatest return. Get me 10% or more per year if you possibly can. I don't want to give up my retirement for some virtuous concept which won't achieve anything. So I don't think we come down hard enough on super funds with their primary objective being to return the most money to you possible. I think they're starting to see superannuation as a bit of a plaything, and that's not okay. They've got to get back to basics and returning the best return to investors as they possibly can.
And we're seeing quite a bit of backlash in regards to that, because in the media there's reports of some funds being given an absolute shellacking by their shareholders because of exactly that. They actually their funding or the way they've invested has actually, you know, created a reduction in their investment because of following these DEI kind of policies and climate change initiatives, which has actually been really harmful. So there is a little bit of a backlash happening now, and it's I only talked to Bruce the other day about this whole issue with California and the fires, how all that has also backfired on them from these kind of decisions, and I think more people are starting to wake up to the fact that this, what they've been pushing on us for the last 5 to 10 years is really coming home to roost us, as Bruce kind of said, and it's quite sad, but I'm hopeful, and I can see some chinks in the armor of the people that have been pushing this for a long time. So, which is really good to see.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll mention about super is because super is so massive, and there's very few investments they throw the money into. Like, for example, like one of our biggest bank, it's sitting at a dividend yield of like 3%. Like that is a horrible return, and price to earnings ratios in the mid-20s or something from memory. So obviously super funds are just habitually investing money in the stock market in these same companies because that's just where they throw the cash. But really, it overvalues their favorite stocks massively. And it kind of just ruins the sort of free market for retail investors in the stock market, even because they're kind of just investing out of habit more so than where they should, if you know what I mean. So they're waving a big stick and have a huge amount of influence over public listed stocks and really all investments, because they're controlling, way more money than the government is per year.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's your thoughts then on the idea, if they're not going to change anything, and obviously that's people power and the right candidates and all that sort of stuff. But what's your thoughts then on because I guess it's compulsory, on a public, on a sort of public owned super fund where we're talking trillions of dollars that would go in there, that would just looks at investing in Australian infrastructure that would bring a return, investing in Australia on things, or things within Australia. What's your thoughts on that sort of concept?
I'm going to go a bit libertarian here. I think you should invest where you're going to get the best returns, and if that's not Australia, unfortunately that's where you've got to chase the return. I think that's just a commercial reality in this world. People aren't going to give up financial returns. It's kind of almost doing what they're doing with the net zero stuff, but in reverse. It's ideological. Really, the only solution is to increase the returns that we get in Australia by doing things like maybe build a few coal-fired power stations and reduce the cost of electricity. That'd be a good start. Then we might be able to actually make something and get some returns. Repealing an awful lot of regulations that are unnecessary. We need to do a bit of a Harvey MLA with Australia in order to make the investment returns viable. We have amazing natural assets, coal, iron, gas. We barely tax our gas, right? So you've seen the gas market. We export cheap and we charge top dollar domestically. It makes no sense. If you look at countries like, Qatar, UAE, those sorts of areas, the tax rates are so freaking low because they realize the value of their assets. So I think we need to have a discussion around that sort of stuff as well. And it may not please the big miners and the big donors, but it's probably worth having that chat, because I think that's the solution is lowering taxes, reducing regulations, lowering the cost of energy. Energy is the biggest input for many businesses. And that's going to allow the returns domestically to be sufficient, because in Australia, we're obsessed with the housing market. Everyone invests in houses. That's all we know. Very few people even trade the share market, to be honest. It's houses, houses, houses. It's debt and houses. And I think that's why we have more debt than nearly any other country in the world on a consumer basis. That's why houses are amongst the, I think Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney are all amongst the top 10 least affordable cities in the world. That's a shocking thing to have. And the reason is we don't really have much to invest in, do we? We're like, let's just buy a house and we hope that it doubles every 10 years. But it may have done that for the last few decades, but markets don't do that forever. It's not sustainable.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And you make a good point there with electricity, and I mean we've talked about it and power and this whole renewable shift. And how it's killed our economy, but it's, people are starting to realize how it's really affecting this whole push to net zero and the renewable shift. It's hurting us massively as a country, and this pushback on nuclear and closing the, here in South Australia in particular, we just blew up ours and just went, well, let's just, even as a backup, so we've killed ourselves with that. But it also segues into another post of yours, which you shared about, obviously, they're talking about this post, households, including government electricity rebates. Electricity prices for households have fallen by 14.6% since June 23. Excluding these rebates, electricity prices for households would have increased 16.9%. And you've spoken into that as well. And I know that Bruce has spoken into that when he's been on the show as well. It is though, isn't it? It's a false dichotomy, isn't it?
Yeah, but CPI numbers are a joke. So they're saying we're back within the 2-3% band that the RBA wants to see to cut rates. But the reality is CPI includes electricity. It's a large chunk of it. And the number they're using is net of taxpayer-funded rebates. So they're saying that electricity prices have fallen by 14.6% since June 2023. But I had to read nearly to the bottom of the release to find that paragraph, which goes on to say that net of rebates, electricity prices still would have increased since June 23 by another 16.9%. So electricity is not becoming any cheaper. It's a bit like socialism or communism, that those that push those ideologies will say, it's the best system. No one's done it right yet, or no one's done enough of it. That's the same thing with wind turbines and solar panels. They're just saying we just don't have enough of them yet. Give us a few more and it'll become cheaper. But that's just entirely untrue, because an electricity market, even though, yes, solar power is very cheap when the sun is shining, it's cheap to install and it's quick. That is absolutely true. But a market also requires stability. Otherwise, you have massive peaks and massive troughs. Electricity is negatively priced sometimes. That is true when you have too much sun and wind. But at night, you have a massive peak in price, which more than cancels out that low-cost energy during the day. So without a stable baseload energy source like coal, which is cheap and abundant, you're always going to have rising electricity prices, not to mention the fact that one of the largest components of the cost of energy is the transmission network. And we've barely even started building that yet. So we've got to build that many poles and wires. It's not funny. We have to knock down so much native forest. We have to knock down and take so much farmland away in order to achieve what? House prices, electricity prices that are still rising 17% in the past 18 months. No, thank you. It's insane. And I can't see this coming to an end until, once again, I'll have a crack at Dutton, but he's got a nuclear policy. I'm not opposed to nuclear energy. I think we should repeal the ban on nuclear energy right now, but I'm not sure economically or realistically if that's going to make any difference at all over the next 2 decades. It is going to take us 15 to 20 years to build a nuclear power station, whether we like it or not. We don't have the skills. We don't have the expertise. What we need to do immediately is approve the construction of at least a few coal-fired power stations around Australia, so that we know that we have that stability of supply at least over the next 40, 50 years, right? We need that base load built now. And from what I can tell, when I was reading a report just before Christmas, it will only take about 3 years to build a coal-fired power station, because we know what we're doing and they're actually not that complex to build. So why not do it? And why not extend the life of the ones that we have as much as humanly possible to try and restore our quality of life slightly and lower the cost of energy? Because the people that can least afford high electricity prices also can't afford their own solar panels. They're going to be paying the high bills. It's the lowest and least, once again, that are left paying the most. It's insane.
Yeah, exactly. And all these, solar panels and battery initiatives where the government gives money to the people that, or, other people's money to these people that put solar panels and batteries into homes. Again, that's just inflates the price as well. So, you might think you're getting a good deal as a homeowner and you're paying this thing off over 10 years at a really reduced rate. At the end of the day, the taxpayers, you as a taxpayer, then as well as paying a massive amount of money because it's inflating the prices back to which the government pays for. So it's a double-edged sword all the way through all the time. So yeah, look, it's a massive thing, and it does make sense what you're saying. These nuclear nuclear is going to take a long time to build. Sure, once it's up online, it's going to generate electricity for a ton of time. But like you say, the best way to do it, we've done it. They're doing it in China. They're pumping them out there over there, as well as obviously around the world with nuclear. So, and all these sound bites about nuclear bad and all this, but it's just all part of this whole agenda, though, isn't it? I mean, I just wonder whether 70% of the population are starting to see the BS that's coming out, or whether they're still sheltered under the mainstream media kind of narrative. But I'm starting to see a shift, somewhat. I'm hoping that this upcoming election, we will see some changes, especially in the Senate and so forth, which is going to be quite critical, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
The conversation is starting to change a little bit. I think, Chris Bowen is so far out of touch with the average punter now. It's not funny. He's really just almost making a fool of himself every day with the statements he makes online. He's, all he's doing is just criticizing nuclear and doubling down on, their form of energy being the cheapest form of energy. But cheapest would also correlate with a reduction in electricity prices. But unfortunately, it's the absolute opposite. They continue to run up at a great rate of knots. And our state of South Australia is the worst. We have the highest penetration of wind and solar, and we have the most expensive retail electricity prices in Australia as well. You can't tell me that's a coincidence. And Mr. Malinowskis has been pushing that total snake oil of green hydrogen as well. That's a genuine joke. So there was a briefing we got in federal parliament. I won't say who gave the briefing, but it was someone from overseas, and they stood up the front of the room before it commenced, and his words were, "I'm just going to commence my address today with a joke," and the word hydrogen popped up on the screen. That's how much respect green hydrogen has across the world. What it's doing is taking a unit of energy from solar power, so-called surplus solar power, and then turning it into a fraction of a unit of energy that you store. So you're chewing up so much energy to create even less energy that you might store in a gas bottle and then burn one day. It's insane, right? So makes no sense. It's a total joke, and the rest of the world will be laughing at us over this concept of green hydrogen. And imagine throwing taxpayer money into that when you could be throwing it into building a coal-fired power station, or I don't know, feeding the homeless would be a good start. Just do something half useful with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems to be like this real agenda with in the West in particular, New Zealand, Australia, UK, Canada, all those, it kind of went down the same path with this net zero and renewables, and it's all starting to come back to bite them, as in particular with the wind farms and all that, and they're talking about being okay with culling koalas to make way for these things. I mean, that is just unfathomable, and where's the outrage, the green outrage? But just wanted to as well, something that you shared as well that you can talk into, but we've got old mate Mr. Chalmers here. He's talking about under Labor, the economy has continued to grow. Most advanced economies have gone backwards at least once in the UK, and New Zealand fell into recession. But you chipped old Jim about that as well. Did you want to have a yarn about that?
Yeah, so there's one thing to say that the pie is growing, but unfortunately the pie that is Australia's population is also growing massively. So that the slice of the pie that we all get is shrinking each quarter. And for 7 consecutive quarters now, we've been in a per capita recession, which means that per person in Australia, our wealth is shrinking on average for 7 consecutive quarters, which is a record since records began with the ABS. So You don't hear Jim talking on a per capita basis, but I'm telling you what, the Australian people think on a per capita basis. At an election time, people think about their own hip pocket and how they feel compared to previous governments. Now, that previous Liberal government was probably the worst we've seen with money that I think we've had in Australia. They spent and borrowed like crazy, but Mr. Chalmers has been no better. He has not trimmed the budget. He has grown the public service enormously. I think 82% of all jobs created last year were taxpayer funded, all new jobs in Australia. 8 out of 10. So you're essentially robbing the taxpayer to pay for a new job, and there's a lot less taxpayers left, isn't there? There's a lot more consuming and a lot less paying. So the economy is a Ponzi scheme really at the moment, because you're using more and more future taxpayers' money. You're borrowing now. He is borrowing. He's not bringing enough revenue. So you're borrowing money to pay for more public service jobs, which aren't really jobs at all. In my mind, a real job is a job created in the private sector, because the private sector is the one that pays taxes, which fund the public sector jobs. Public sector jobs aren't real productivity increases, and they're also not net taxpayers, right? They consume taxes. So the economy is in a lot of strife, but I'm hoping to see a bit of courage during this election campaign, especially from Dutton, around reducing the size of the public service. We would love to see a Dodge in Australia. I don't know if we're going to get, a Musk and Vivek combination in Australia. I don't know. We could have a crack, Mark, couldn't we? I'm sure we could wipe a few lines out of the budget, but the reality is government is the biggest contributor to GDP growth at the moment, and government is code word for taxpayers. And we've got mining investment, imports and exports all shrinking year on year, which is a bad thing. Miners are not invested. And a lot of the non-mining investment, which has grown, a lot of that is just feeder businesses that rely on the likes of their NDIS as well. So they're not directly paid by government, but a lot of those jobs are sort of loosely attached to the exorbitant growth in the NDIS, because let's face it, that's where most of the new jobs are coming from, and they're not. There's a lot of issues with that system. Yeah.
Oh, huge, yeah. And I mean, when you have other people's money funding that sort of stuff, the prices get inflated. I know that when they brought the NDIS in, you know yourself, I worked in that sector. A lot of the services to people living with a disability went skyrocketing high, because simply for the fact that they were dealing with someone that's living with a disability, and the NDIS is there, this big pot of money that the other people's money is funding. So yeah, definitely there's some huge issues there. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because you sort of talked along it's almost that libertarian kind of thought about reducing government and spending and getting that as much out of our lives as possible, because it's costing the individual an absolute arm and a leg. And people would say, well, if you're working in the public sector, well, you're doing all right because you've got a good job and generally getting good money, and generally there's not too much heat on you, and you almost have to kill someone to get sacked from a public service job as well. So so it's kind of catch-22 there, but it does bring me into a bit of a conversation about, I guess, the elections. We've talked about it a bit, and we've got someone like Gerard Rennick and also the Libertarians constantly sparring on platforms that we watch, and because the Libertarians are basically strip everything right back, and Gerard has some of these things are a bit more nuanced and doesn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I think it's really and it's important that they do have this stoush and debate and air it all out, and come to some sort of agreement. But you being with Ralph Babet and the UAP and my smaller party, minor party, One Nation, we are at a really important crossroads, I think, and that's why I wanted to talk about that, is because obviously I've got a lot of time for Gerard Rennick, and he'd probably be one that I would like to see heading up a Doge, right? But a lot of time for him. So he's got the People First Party, and then obviously there's some amazing libertarian concepts and candidates. Obviously the UAP and the One Nation's putting out some candidates in that as well. But I still fear that being almost still divided and not coming together as a unified force against Liberal and Labor, Greens and Nationals and Teals, I feel that we still open ourselves up to shoot ourselves in the foot. And I think we really run the risk of not really effectively giving them a run. if we can't unify on, can't get this played out behind the scenes to come to a common ground where you could work together and have some, good candidates running certain seats and Senate seats and all that sort of stuff. Do you feel that there's a bit of that happening behind the scenes, or would you like to see? I guess you're with FOTH. You talk to a lot of people with the Aligned Council of Australia as well. Do you get a sense for the Australians that are following this, like me, that there is some unity happening and there's some conversations to bring this all together? Or do you think that they've still got a long way to go and they really need to get their act together?
One of the oldest rules in politics is that, politics is downstream from culture. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that same concept in the minor party. You would call them right wing, but I don't. I just say more the freedom versus control argument. We're more on the freedom side than the control side, which the major parties are definitely pro control. On the freedom side, at the grassroots level, where the average voter and average punter is, they're screaming for unity and they're screaming for success. Maybe at the higher levels of the party, there's still those sort of the brands and the personalities, but there's also the conviction. Like the ones that get elected have a great amount of conviction, right? And they love pushing the limits and prosecuting their arguments. So they continue to do their own thing for that reason, because you know what, they've got so much depth of character and conviction that they want to really have a crack, and they'll happily debate someone that's mostly on the same side because they really want to prosecute their argument and debate it. You see Rennick and Libertarians, greatly respect both of them, and I love to see that because they're actually having a great contest of ideas. Now, the people perceive that as fighting. It's not fighting. They're prosecuting arguments and both landing some pretty good points sometimes, to be honest. They're not resorting to personal attacks. I never see them attack each other personally, and I'd much prefer to see that than see your standard major party candidate who remains mute when they know something's wrong, but refuses to speak up because they care too much about the party or their future career prospects in that space. So they just bumble along, they get re-elected 3 or 4 terms, they're a nice guy, they're probably okay, but they're ineffective and they achieve nothing. I think our job is still to push the limits. I'm going to be cynical and say that this election, we're all going to be relatively disappointed again with the number of people that we do get elected to the upper house. It's probably going to be pretty similar to previous elections in the minor party space. It's just how the numbers work, because politics is a numbers game. But what I am hoping and praying, and I really want to be involved in it after this election, is a true unity movement. I think this election's done. It's going to run as it is. And we may fluke 1 or 2 additional senators. We may lose one. That's probably about how it's going to go. But the numbers will still be very similar to what they are at the moment. We've got 5 or 6 good senators out of 76, and I feel like it's going to be 5 or 6 again. That should be 12. You and I both know that. And if we did work together, we would definitely get 6 senators elected every election cycle, equal to the Greens. I actually feel like once you got 6 elected and they stuck together for a term, you'd start to squeeze the Greens out. I think the Greens would start to disappear because it's like, hang on, these guys are just, their policies are crazy. Like, let's face it, they're not logical. They don't achieve great outcomes for the Australian people. And I reckon if we had some form of balance of power, people would start to see the rewards of our combined policies, the Conservatives, the Libertarians. And I don't even like either of those labels. I just like common sense, to be honest. It's what we are. We're people that can relate to the average punter, but also see through the BS of the political system and how much noise there is. So I hope, Mark, that between us, we can all keep pushing for that unity. And, you know, I'd love to see the Bob Day concept. I'm sure you've seen it. He put it out a couple of years ago of the centre-right alliance, where in the upper house you have one box which has the names of 5 or 6 parties in abbreviations, and then you negotiate who the best person is in that state. They get position number 1, and you lump 12% of first preferences in that box, and you guarantee that they get elected. 3 or 4%, I've been there last time, it's not enough. You've got to get 5, 6, 7, 8. If you get to 12, you're in. You've got to sort of make sure there is no doubt that you're going to get elected and funnel all those votes into the one box if possible.
Yeah, well, it sounds like we need to have more of those conversations with people. You're definitely much better connected in that space as well, and I'm pretty sure you're working behind the scenes with a lot of people that are in the know to kind of, get this unity going. And look, in our electorate, because I believe you're in the same federal electorate as myself. You mentioned about the candidates sort of just sitting and writing it out, and not to say that person's done nothing, but again, I feel the current sitting member has kind of been that and hasn't really challenged and pushed for some of the big ticket items that we're talking about and really headed that up. But going into this next election, we currently know the three candidates here in Mayo. So obviously Rebecca Hewitt's just been announced for One Nation, and we had Zane Bassick for the Liberal Party, and obviously Rebecca has indicated that she's going to run again for another. I think maybe her last. I'm not sure, but I did hear murmurings that she was potentially looking at her last. So, look, and I say to people, and I've said it in other shows, and that is that I really recommend that people look at every single candidate that is going to put their hand up for your electorate, and make a time to talk to them and really find out where they sit in the big picture things, and especially in our camp where we know there's this control, there's this global control influence over our nation, and I'd say even over our bureaucracy and politics. So it's really about who's really going to stick it up and go, no, I'm actually going to push back on this and have the courage to do so on my behalf as a constituent. And I really, that's one of the biggest things. And I've said to people that I probably won't make a decision on my candidate until the very last few days, even maybe the day of the election, of who I'm going to vote for, because I really want to unpick everything that each candidate is going to be standing for. And I think every Australian needs to do that if we want to see change.
Yeah, what you're saying is what everyone should do. Unfortunately, reality is not very few people would read a single policy, let alone look into the candidates in their electorate. And as a result, that's how we end up with a fully entrenched two-party system, because people think, I want change, or people think, they're okay. Like that's the depth of the thought process. So it is on us to educate. It's on us to ask questions, and you're doing a great job with what you're doing, Mark, and try and contribute here and there to public conversation and just make people think about what truly matters to them. And a lot of people will be one issue people. There is something that matters more than everything else. It might be the economy, it could be abortion, it could be anything. But for some people, that is the do or die issue. Make sure you ask the question of all the candidates, a yes or no, and then you will know which way to vote. Other people, it's a bit more nuanced, and you'll assess everything on its merits and sort of find the middle ground somewhere. But do the work, and whatever you do, don't throw your vote away with your preferences either, because you control your preferences. No party does. Those how to vote cards, they're just pieces of paper. They just say how they want you to vote, but you vote in whatever order you like. And it could be your second to last option that gets elected. The only one that won't get your vote is that last person on the ticket. There's 6 candidates, and you put Liberal second to last and Labor last, that vote will go to Liberal. But if you put it the other way around, the vote will go to Labor. So think about it right to the end.
Yeah. Yeah, good suggestion. And look, Topher Field's got some great videos on that as well, and on that, and love to be able to speak into that a bit more as the months go on, for coming up to any. He's got to call the election to start with, but he's got till May, I think. And but I'd love to be able to share some of those insights a bit more from people that are in the know like you, and what people could be looking at for the the Senate, if they're looking at voting for someone in the Senate. This is very confusing for a lot of people. It's that big long sheet, and up above the line and below the line. The federal MP one's quite easy, but the Senate one's a bit more tricky for most people.
Indeed.
So I'd be love to have those conversations, and we always welcome. Obviously, I'd love having you on. We have some great conversations, and looking forward to a few more times that you're able to come on to unpack some things with me, which would be really great. So look, really appreciate the time that you spent with me today. It doesn't take long for an hour to get burned up. So yeah, good on you, Michael, and thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your time, Mark. God bless you.
And you too, brother. Take care.